Welcome to today's webinar in the Knowledge Mile series, part of the Lord Mayor's lectures on behalf of Professor Michael Mainelli, whose theme for his mayoral year is Connect to Prosper. In this free online lecture series, we address the connections in and around the square mile, what Michael likes to call the world's coffee house, and how these might help us to tackle future global challenges. I'm Professor Tim Connell, Chairman of the Gresham Society and a Fellow of Gresham College here in the City of London, and I'm also a liveryman of the Stationers' Company. I'll be convening this session and moderating the questions and answers after today's lectures. Now, this is the plan for today. So a quick introduction from me, the keynote presentation from Roddy Somerville, and then there'll be time for questions and answers. Now, it's a really interesting topic today, the playing card industry and its relevance. So I'm delighted to welcome Roddy Somerville. Roddy, perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you to the Lord Mayor and to the Gresham Society for inviting me to talk to you today. And thank you to the Backstage team, which is helping to run these events. I have been involved with playing cards since the late 70s when I worked for Stanley Gibbons in the Strand and subsequently opened my own business in Edinburgh. I moved to France in the year 2000 and continued to sell playing cards by mail order. I've been an active member of the Worshipful company of makers of playing cards since 1984, and I'm currently the curator of their collection, which is housed at what was called the London Metropolitan Archives and is now called the London Archives. That's a quick summary. Now, I would like to dedicate the presentation to the late Sir Roger Gifford. He's an old friend, or was an old friend, and advocate of green finance, who, during his year in office, gave playing cards as his mayoral gift. Playing cards have formed part of the fabric of society for almost 600 years in Britain, and even longer in certain Central and Southern European countries. Young and old, rich and poor, all ranks in society have played cards. Just a few examples. Children may play Snap or Beggar My Neighbour. Workmen might have a quick game of pontoon in their lunch hour. Bored servicemen might play games while waiting for action. And royalty are no strangers to the odd game of whist or bridge. In other spheres, cards may be used for educational purposes, for propaganda, entertainment, or magic. I will return to some of these aspects later. What about the industry itself? How is it surviving in this computer and digital age? Well, the changes and developments in the industry over the last 50 years or so mirror very closely what has happened to the world economy as a whole. When I started in the playing card business in 1977, it was dominated by family-run firms, which took a real pride in their products and in the history behind them. There was at least one manufacturer in almost every major European country, and even several in some, not forgetting the USA and China. Gradually over the years, the number of manufacturers has dwindled to such an extent that there are now only two major players left in Europe, in Belgium and Austria, and a couple of smaller ones in Italy and Poland. The Austrian company Piatnik is celebrating its bicentenary this year and will be hosting the annual convention of the International Playing Card Society in Vienna next month. The Belgian company, Carta Mundi, based in Turnhout, was formed in 1970 when 4 local businesses decided to join forces. Carta Mundi has become a major global player with production facilities or joint ventures in Belgium, France, Germany, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Poland, Spain, the UK, India, Brazil, the USA, Japan, Chile, and Mexico. And apologies if that list is not complete. Playing cards per se are no longer the staple of the industry, although millions of packs are still being produced every week. However, whereas once it was the manufacturers who designed and produced the cards which they thought their customers would like to play with, in recent times the tables have been turned, and it is now artists with creative talent who are largely responsible for new issues. This is done mainly through Kickstarter projects, where an artist puts up his or her ideas online and seeks financial backing from sponsors, who, if the project reaches its target and goes ahead, will then receive one or more packs when they are produced. Via this method, new packs are seeing the light of day at the rate of slightly more than one a day. Yes, one a day. Here is an example by artist Ian Cumpsty from Cumbria, who has reimagined the standard English cards as if we had adopted a design from Lyon instead of one from Rouen, which is traditionally where the English card is reckoned to have come from. There is another current one called Cavaliers by Lee Mackenzie, not yet issued, which has raised £70,000 from almost 700 backers. A pretty amazing amount. With modern printing methods, it is in fact cheaper to do small runs than it used to be. Thus, a run of a few hundred packs may not cost the earth. Last year, Chloe Campbell, a young British artist who specializes in paper cuts, created these fine designs of the 52 churches in the City of London built by the office of Sir Christopher Wren. There were just 100 packs produced in the original print run. Incidentally, the workforce in a playing card factory is numerically nothing like what it used to be. With modern techniques, just a handful of workers can keep the presses running. In total, Carta Mundi, for example, have a workforce of around 2,900 people spread worldwide. In order to survive, all manufacturers have had to adapt and diversify. This has meant moving more and more into areas such as trading cards, and here I'm thinking of things like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Card games such as Uno and all the spin-offs, scratch cards, and cards for board and tabletop games. New board games are appearing all the time and are often tried out at fairs, such as the huge annual one in Essen in Germany. In 2023, that fair attracted 193,000 visitors over 4 days. There were 900 exhibitors from 56 countries, with over 1,700 novelties being released and tested. Card manufacturers also make puzzles, including jigsaws, another area which has seen something of a renaissance in recent years. In the card field, although patience cards are no longer made and sold in the same quantities as they used to be, mainly because patience games are easy to play online, tarot cards have become big business. This trend started back in 1973 with the release of the Bond film Live and Let Die. In it, you may remember James Bond used a stacked deck of cards, tarot cards, to trick Solitaire into thinking that they were destined to be lovers. That was really the start of the whole modern craze for tarot and fortune-telling cards. But where does London fit into all of this, I hear you ask? Well, traditionally, right up to the second quarter of the 20th century, London was the centre of the playing card industry in the UK. Firms such as Goodall, with a factory in Camden Town, and De La Rue in Bunhill Row, dominated the market. Unfortunately, De La Rue's factory was bombed during the Second World War, at which point John Waddington Limited of Leeds offered to print packs for De La Rue, and this they did. There is an example coming up of a Waddington No. 1 pack made, quote, within the limits of current restrictions, unquote, i.e. during World War II. It still carries the original threepence duty wrapper. All was well until the duty of 3 old pence on a pack of cards, and it had been 3 pence since 1862, was abolished in 1960. This led to a flood of cheap imports, especially from Eastern Europe, Hong Kong, and China. By the 1980s, production at Waddington's was in decline. In the years that followed, 2 new companies appeared on the scene: Richard Edward Limited in Plumstead and Games and Print Services in Canvey Island. The former survived for a number of years, while Games and Print Services was eventually absorbed into the Cartamundi empire. Nowadays, there are a small number of printers capable of producing playing cards, though the quality can be variable. As I've mentioned quality, let me say a few words here about the board used to make playing cards. Traditionally, this would have been made up of several layers of pasteboard with a very thin layer of a tarry substance in the middle to render the cards opaque. In modern times, recycled board has sometimes been used. The first pack claiming to have been printed on recycled board was Art for the Earth, with designs by 54 different artists, published in 1992. Shown here are the designs contributed by Quentin Blake on the 8 of Diamonds, Dame Elizabeth Blackadder on the 2 of Clubs, and Raymond Briggs on the 5 of Hearts. These designs were executed in what we call the transformation style. That is, where the pips or spots have been left in their normal positions but incorporated into an overall design. Other innovations have included different materials such as stainless steel and water-based varnishes rather than oil-based ones. Let me return to who might use cards or for what purposes they might be produced. Children from a young age love playing games, and I feel it is the responsibility of parents and grandparents to introduce children to card games. When we were young, did we not all develop numeracy skills and the capacity to memorize from playing card games? Sitting around a card table playing games, either individually or in partnership, can be a great way of developing social skills generally. Testing levels of perception and observation can also be carried out using playing cards. For example, during a job interview. Take, for instance, the cards on the next slide. What is unusual about them? You can ignore the name Inardo, but what is unusual about the cards themselves? I might tell you a little later. I can tell you that only about 50% of people spot anything unusual within 20 to 30 seconds. So if you do spot something, you'll be doing quite well. That leads me to cards for magic. This is a steady market and one which uses playing cards on a regular basis. Most card magicians use only a standard pack of cards manipulated by sleight of hand, but there are, of course, numerous trick packs. That is nothing new, as there were trick packs being produced as long ago as the 18th century. Getting a shy youngster to learn and present card tricks in public can be a great way to bring a young adult out of his or her shell and to develop their self-confidence. Casinos, too, require a steady stream of new packs for the gaming tables. Printing these is a very specialized business, only undertaken by a few printing plants. Having toured a few playing card factories myself, I can tell you that this is a high security operation carried out in a part of the factory that you and I will never see and to which only an absolute minimum number of workers have access. In the field of education, playing cards can be a useful way to illustrate, say, a history lesson. These cards coming up are from a pack depicting episodes from the story of the Spanish Armada. The designs may sometimes be biased, but on occasion they provide us with the nearest thing we have to a newspaper report of events of the day. In the commercial field, playing cards are still a relatively cheap and lasting form of advertising. They've even been used by luxury brands such as Hermès to present their latest fashion collections. It's only a short step from advertising to propaganda. And here we're not talking about something new. Political pacts can be straightforward or cruelly caricatural. There is a long tradition in the USA of issuing pacts at the time of presidential elections. Here in the UK, most political pacts of the last 40 years have involved caricatures, but I have to say that their popularity has tailed off somewhat. In recent times, 2003 to be precise, you may remember the images put out by the US Defense Intelligence Agency of the 52 most wanted Iraqis. This gave a huge amount of publicity to playing cards in general. The images were available online to download anywhere in the world, with the result that many different versions of these cards exist. The originals are hard to find. Coming right up to date, a pack has been issued with photographs of landmines, etc. These were delivered to the Ukraine so that soldiers and locals could identify suspicious objects which might suddenly explode. Mentioning the military gives me the opportunity to mention that the livery company to which I belong, the Worshipful company of makers of playing cards, has affiliations with several branches of the services. We have supplied cards to both 33 Engineer Regiment and HMS Diamond. We have also helped organisations such as the London Drug Policy Forum to get cards issued with relevant messages on them. And in 2020, we issued a COVID-19 pack, which raised close to £15,000 for the Lord Mayor's charities. Before I close, let me say a bit more about the makers of playing cards. We are an extremely active livery company with 150 members, almost 80% of whom contribute voluntarily on a regular basis to the company's charity arm. This supports young people under the age of 25 in many different fields. We produce an annual commemorative set of playing cards to be distributed at the installation banquet of the incoming master. This year's master, Anthony Blower, has rightly chosen to honour the bicentenary of the RNLI, which was founded as a result of a meeting in the City of London in 1824. Our company will be celebrating its 400th anniversary in 2028. To mark that occasion, we are delighted to announce that there will be a very special exhibition at the Guildhall Art Gallery of treasures from the company's collection of playing cards, as I say, currently housed at the London Archives, as well as other items on loan from private and public collections, including the British Museum. This will almost certainly run from September 2028 to January 2029. So watch out for more publicity near the time. In the meantime, if you would like to contact the company, you will find contact details on this final slide, together with details of a website with rules for just about every card game under the sun, 2 collector societies, an online encyclopedia of playing cards, and museums with playing card collections both in Britain and abroad. I hope you will agree that playing cards and the playing card industry do still have a place in modern society. Long may that continue to be the case.
Well, Roddy, thank you very much indeed. That's taken us into all sorts of areas that I would never really have thought of, and very interesting, the historical aspects of this, particularly the way in which the fortunes of card producing companies have waxed and waned over the years. Now, we have about 20 minutes for questions, but something I'd like to start off with, you mentioned sort of commemorative packs of cards. which you use for the installation of your new master, who I see appears as the ace of spades. I'm not too sure about whether this is complimentary or not. But what about major international events? Do you produce cards for things, say, I mean, we've got the Olympics on at the moment. Would that be the sort of topic you might use?
Each year it's the master's choice as to what to put on the cards. And in the past, it always used to be something commemorating what had happened in the previous 12 months. We now tend to look ahead so that the master can present cards with something which is relevant during his year in office. We prefer to commemorate British or London events wherever possible, or at least to have a London connection. Of course, there are packs that are being produced for the Olympics, and I do have some of those. I was actually just going to mention briefly that if you have been watching the Olympics, the little mascot is called Le Fridge. And you might think, what on earth is Le Fridge? Well, the fridge comes from the Phrygian bonnets, which the revolutionaries used to wear in France. Well, on playing cards, those bonnets have also appeared. And there's an example. In the 1790s, and this card dates from about 1793, the king's crowns were replaced by Phrygian bonnets. So there you are. There's a link to what's going on right now in Paris.
Yes. Oh, well, you're raising some interesting questions here. Can you email the slide deck to participants? I'm not sure if that is possible or whether we can actually incorporate that into the lecture when it goes up online.
Sorry, I missed
the question.
The
The question from Chris Bromby is, please email the slide deck to participants. I'm not quite
the
sure
slides,
which slide
there's a
deck
link
is.
to the slides in the chat, and I can follow up with everyone.
Sasha's going to follow up. Absolutely splendid, good.
Right.
And yes, something I was going to ask about sort of habits with playing cards. You mentioned it's a very good way for children to learn to count and to socialize in different ways. Now, when I was a child, yes, I used to play a lot with my grandparents. In fact, my grandfather taught me an extremely important lesson. He said, always keep 4 aces in your hand, lad, and 1 up your sleeve, just in case. Now, we used to play things like German whist and rummy. Are these games still played, or have they gone out of fashion?
Games do go in and out of fashion, and I'm not a great expert on card games, so I can't tell you which ones happen to be more or less popular at the moment. Card games traditionally were passed down by word of mouth, so of course many different variations of different card games developed. So when you have something called something bridge or something whist, it tends to be a local or a regional variation of another game. As long as everybody agrees on the rules when you're playing a game, it doesn't really matter. But that's how cards have developed, how games have developed, and how their spread has developed.
What about Uno? My grandchildren are very keen on this, and it's a game I had never heard of. Is that a modern game that's come in from somewhere, or is it just something I missed?
It is a modern game. I can't tell you exactly when it started, but it certainly now must be 30, 40 years old at least. And again, it takes away some of the difficulty that perhaps is perceived when people look at a pack of cards and see suits. It's more to do with colors and numbers. But actually, it too has its basis in older card games. It is astonishing, though, that people manage to come up with new ones like that, which then take off in such a big way. Yes,
it's interesting the way it's taken off, and presumably children still play Snap and what we used to call Beat Your Neighbour, and adults, I suppose, still play Pontoon and Poker. But are there adult games comparative, say, to Uno, which have emerged recently?
I would say that currently amongst adults, it's board games that are more popular than card games. Poker is possibly considered more of an adult game. It's interesting if you look at the poker tournaments and so on, it does tend to be mainly men. Poker cards, incidentally, are usually played with slightly wider cards than, say, bridge. And I don't know if you've ever noticed that bridge cards tend to be slightly slimmer than poker cards. And that tradition is simply because most men played poker and they have bigger hands. Simple as that.
How curious. Now, a good one from Andrew Sinclair here is, how and why did the packs we know today develop with 4 suits, 13 per suit, etc.? Bearing in mind, of course, that continental cards tend to start at 7.
Well, there have been packs with 52 cards from the earliest times, and by that I mean from the 15th, 16th century onwards. The suits that we use, hearts, diamonds, clubs, spades, are called the French suits because they were developed in France, and they were simplifications of a whole range of suits that had been used up until that point. If you can just imagine some of the things that were used for the suits, for example, thistles, pomegranates, printers' inking balls, roses. These were all far too complicated to reproduce, and so these forms that we now use were much simplified to make them easier when it came to stencil coloring, for example. In general, the changes that have been made in the printing industry have been mirrored by the changes in the playing card world. In other words, as soon as a new technique was introduced in the printing industry, it was adopted almost immediately in the playing card industry.
Now, would this be the right moment to ask the answer to your query about the Enardo set of cards and what was wrong with them? I think I spotted it myself, but can you reveal it?
I wonder how many people spotted it. The suit colors are reversed. You have the red suits printed in black and the black suits printed in red. It's quite amazing how many people just don't see that.
Yeah. Yes, that's a curious one. Now, Michelle Paul says, thank you for such an engaging lecture. Is there any there's Leonardo. Is there any connection between the playing card industry and the production of the old cigarette cards? Yes, they were wonderful.
Yes, there is, and I'll tell you a story if we have time. One of the biggest advertising promotions in the history of playing cards, and probably cigarette cards too, took place in the 1930s. Wills, the cigarette firm, put miniature playing cards into cigarette packets. And the idea was that if you collected a whole set of miniature cards, you could send them in and redeem them for a full-size pack of cards or something rather fancy, like a double bridge set or a double bezique set or whatever. The problem was that everybody smoked in those days, and people would go into their local bars, and there would be a box on the counter with all the spares, and people would put in theirs and take out the ones they needed, and everybody made complete sets. The net result was that the playing card manufacturers were inundated with requests to print cards that had to be sent out to the customers. And I think there were 4 firms involved in printing playing cards just for that one promotion. It was huge. But yes, of course, even prior to that, a lot of cigarette cards featured playing cards. They were miniatures, or they had miniature playing cards in the corner. Some of those, especially the ones with beauties, are quite collectible now.
Well, that's interesting. You also mentioned the fact that cards have sometimes been printed on stainless steel. A set I had as a child were Whitbread pub signs, and they were available in card or also as metal. Was that an unusual sort of thing for promotions?
Well, advertisers are always looking for different ways to promote and something unusual. Just talking about materials for a minute, there have been cards produced on silver, on leather, on shell, and a whole host of other materials. I didn't go into all of them, and I'm hoping that some of those will be on display in our forthcoming exhibition. There are a lot of giveaways. I don't know if you've ever looked in a duty-free shop, but certainly sometimes you might find a pack of cards around the neck of a bottle. They even shape the box sometimes to fit exactly down the side. Advertising packs, they're not particularly collectible because, of course, they tend to be produced in very large quantities. But as I mentioned in the talk, they do tend to last. And I think if you look in the drawers of more elderly members of the family who played cards, you'll almost certainly find some that were made for a cigarette company, for example, and probably for Woodbines or, these are there are a lot of them around. Shell have done a lot as well. They used to do them for petrol promotions.
Yes, as a child, I remember my grandfather had a set from the First World War of our gallant French allies. So I suppose these are the sort of things which are being used as well for propaganda purposes, as you mentioned. Now, Eugene Kiernan's come up with a good one. What countries are the biggest players of cards?
Well, that's an interesting one. If you mean by that the highest percentage of the population who play cards, I think I can give you an answer, and that is Switzerland. And why? Well, first of all, they did have a very fine manufacturer in Schaffhausen or Neuhausen called Müller. But there was actually a question in the Swiss census on one occasion about how many people played cards. And the answer was 87% of the Swiss at that time played cards at least once a week. Now, if you think about it, that is a lot. And if you go to pubs and inns in Austria and Switzerland, you might have noticed that very often in the corner, quite often near the door actually, there is a large round table, and that is the one that's usually reserved for the card players. So we in Britain are probably not the greatest card players. I would suggest it's somewhere in Central Europe.
Yes. Oh well, our local club certainly has a very dedicated small group of bridge players, and of course the English thing, of course, is a folding green baize table. That seems to be de rigueur for the card players. Now, Martin Ashton spotted a good one for you. You produced a card deck for COVID-19 with the King, Queen and Jack wearing face masks. I understand this was very popular for charity. Are there any packs that the company has produced in previous years that have become sought after in particular?
Ooh. The annual packs produced by the company started in 1882, and obviously some of the early ones are pretty sought after. There have been a number of special issues, not perhaps as many in the past as we're now producing in recent years. One or two of the coronation packs that we've done would probably be more collectible, and also we did occasionally do a reproduction of an old pack, even back in the 1880s, and some of those are pretty scarce too. But the idea of helping the industry and promoting other good causes through cards is something that the company's really only adopted in the last maybe 20 years. Prior to that, we stuck almost entirely to just doing the installation pack.
Right. You mentioned the 52 Wren churches, but there was only a run of 100. I mean, have they been produced commercially subsequently? I would have thought they'd be quite popular with tourists.
I think that, yes, as far as I know, there has been a second and possibly even a third edition. And if you can just hold on a second. No, I thought I had one sitting close by. When we heard that this pack was being produced, we suggested to the artist that she should number them, because if there were only 100 being produced, we thought, well, that's really a very small number. So I'm pleased to say the company managed to acquire number 1. I have number 2, but they are marked on the bottom 2 of 100. When somebody produces a limited edition like that and then does a reprint, we always suggest that they make some change or alteration to the wording on the box or the color or something to make it clear that it is not the first edition. So the first edition should, in theory, be more collectible and more valuable.
Right. Now, you're past master of the company. For your master's year, what kind of pack did you produce?
Well, in my year, I wanted to commemorate the fact that I was both Scottish and living in France, and I did commute from France during my year. So there were various elements on the back design connected with Scotland and France, and also my other interests, which were music, philately, and so on. So there are lots of little things, but the overall theme was when playing cards became collectibles, because it was actually, in my year, it was the 25th anniversary of Stanley Gibbons founding their playing card department, which was really when the secondary market in playing cards started, and people started to collect them seriously and to put values on old packs.
Oh, interesting. Now, Shane Drinian has come up with one which I'm not sure I've understood. You mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh! Have there been many attempts from the card industry to engage the younger generations with this hobby?
Yes, I can't talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I know nothing about that, but I can tell you that in our company we have connections with the English Bridge Union, and we do support a program for youngsters to learn bridge in particular, but I'm sure it would encourage other playing card games as well. Yes, there are some. One of the problems, though, I have to say, and if there's any retailers out there listening to this, I would say, please stock playing cards in your little shops, in your little corner shops. Somebody told me they had gone into John Lewis recently, and although they could find board games and so on, they couldn't find a standard pack of cards, which is very sad. So please, shopkeepers, start selling more playing cards.
That's a very interesting one, isn't it? Now, you mentioned the social benefits of teaching card games to the young, but of course, I'm sure there'll be some people who say this could also lead to things like gambling and casinos. As a worshipful company, have you ever found yourself being a target of criticism for perhaps encouraging things like that?
To be honest, no. But the question of whether we should have links to gambling clubs and casinos has come up regularly, and to whether we should allow people from that milieu to become members. And on the whole, the answer is no, we would rather not, because I think for the reasons that you've mentioned, that people might see it as tainting in some way what we try to do. So no, we kind of try to stay above that, if you don't mind.
Yes, well, of course, I do have to say that oddly enough, this particular company is one which I know fairly well because a friend from many years ago became master. And when people ask me about livery companies in the City of London, I sometimes look for the more exotic ones, and I think the makers of playing cards might be one of those. But I have to say, when you go into the website, I was going to say the small print, but the website, you didn't mention that you actually have 5 affiliations with military units, including with the young, and you do raise a significant amount of money, being a fairly small company. Now, you mentioned around about £100,000. What sort of good causes do you support?
Ooh, a wide variety. I'm not personally involved now on the charity committee, but I can tell you, well, as I mentioned in the talk, almost all the charities that we support are for young people between the ages of 18 and 25, not necessarily always even in Britain, because we do have members in other countries as well. But the majority of the groups that we support are in education, in sport, youth clubs, and also in the arts, in dance and music. But we try, wherever possible, to have a member of the company who is a link between the company and the charity, so that we can keep an eye on what's going on and see that the money is being well spent.
Yes. And where did the military affiliations come from? How did you choose particular units?
Well, HMS Diamond, I suppose, is a fairly obvious one. Prior to that, we did support a submarine. It's often through members of the company who have links with the services. We have a number of members of the company who have served in the services. And obviously, we look at each suggestion quite carefully as it comes up. it's become quite a part of our life now, and we get a regular update from all of the different organizations as to what they're up to. For example, when HMS Diamond was shooting down drones off Yemen, we were getting reports. So that was all really quite interesting. And of course, we have regular dinners and meetings and card evenings and golf outings and so on. So we try to keep up the contacts with them in all possible ways.
Yes. Well, as we say in the livery, may it flourish, root and branch forever and ever. I'm afraid this is all the time we have now for questions. So perhaps we could just have a brief look at some of the forthcoming lectures in the series. There we are. So on the 13th, bionic prosthetics and soft prosthetics shows that we really, when it says new frontiers, we have no limit to the range of topics which we're looking at. And the 15th, interesting topic related to London in particular, disabled entrepreneurs and are they getting a fair deal? And Wednesday the 21st, a positive approach from older demographic, blue zones and evergreen lenses. That could well be of interest to people who do a visit to the optician. Now, just finally then, thank you to the audience for your interest and for supporting the Lord Mayor's lectures. And in particular, thanks very much indeed to Roddy Somerville and that splendid bow tie of yours. We're grateful for these insights into this engaging topic, I think, of playing cards and the excellent work being done by the Worshipful company of makers of playing cards. I certainly didn't expect to see Saddam Hussein and a Russian landmine in the course of your lecture. These lectures are all recorded, posted on the Gresham Society website and on our YouTube channel in case you'd like to revisit anything. And we hope to see you all again for another lecture in the Knowledge Mile series. And don't forget the Lord Mayor's theme for the year, which is Connect to Prosper. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.